Hi, I'm Kim Nair,
And I'm Carolyn Scher.
and today we're going to be talking about chapter 17 of the book Risen Motherhood, which is about the gospel and our schooling choices. So, Carolyn, why don't you tell us a little bit about your history with schooling your kids?
Well, first of all, I'm a mother of four and I have six grandkids. So you can do the math. And it's been 35, 40 years since I've done any schooling discernment as far as what's available and what's best for our children. But when it came to our oldest Matthew, in his time to go into school, at that point there weren't a whole lot of options like there are now. So public schools seemed to be the best option for us. Schools in Roscoe were very high quality schools and great education. There wasn't a whole lot available as far as private schools. And then homeschooling, I knew myself well enough to know that homeschooling was not probably an option for us, but keeping that open. So, first day of school, get him on the bus, he's off. And I'm like, I'm set. This is our next 12 years is going to be our son in public school. However, 2 years into school, we found out that he had an issue with his eyesight that was affecting his ability to do school well. So we needed to make a different discernment as to what was best for him. And for us, that turned out to be private school. And that was an opportunity for him to be in an education situation that served him well where he was at. We did that for 2 years. And then we reassessed because we noticed that he was functioning so much better, and decided at that point that public school is what we wanted to do, what we wanted to try. And so we sent him back to public school, and that's where he flourished. And so God was really good at showing us during that time his sovereign plan for this young man. God loved him, that God had a plan for him, that our plans are not necessarily his plans, and that they can change in a dime. Yeah. And so we were so encouraged by that. That served us well in the future with him, and how we looked at him. We looked at him as God's own. So I'm thankful for that transition. It was not easy. Taking him out of public school, was like, what are people going to think? Yeah. Something's wrong. And the school system wasn't real happy with us pulling him out. So, you're dealing with those things about what does it look like for myself, and thinking that, I had to prove something. But coming to that understanding that I didn't need to prove anything, that he was God's, and this was God's plan, and we were good. And so that gave great freedom when it came to school choices. So how about you, Kim? What was your experience?
We kind of had a similar experience in a way. So when my oldest, whose name is Micah, when he was going to start school, I was kind of thinking that maybe I should homeschool him, but like you, I thought that is not within my strengths. I don't think I can do that. And it just got to the point where, okay, we have to make a decision like right now. It's time to enroll him. And we ended up enrolling him in public school. And our first year, that kindergarten year was so fraught with tears and stress, and just, I always joke that Micah got to know the principal way too well. And by the end of the year, I just, for many reasons, I was like, this is not working. And so we ended up switching to homeschool. It was just the best option for us at the time. We were in the Winnebago school system, which is just real small, and there just wasn't a lot of like extra resources available. And he really needed like a small group type like learning environment. And so I got thrown into homeschool, and it's been a very sanctifying process for me, but we ended up finding our groove, and now he's in 6th grade this year, and so that's where we're at. Like what you said with school choices feeling difficult, like you were worried about like what people would think. I think I felt that too, and I was also worried about like would I do well, and I think part of that comes from I think we take too much credit over like how much control we have over how our kids are going to turn out. Did you feel like that for a while?
Yes, and there's kind of a fear factor there as well, because you're like, if I make the wrong decision, I've just destroyed my child, and their future, and everything that lies ahead, because we have that preconceived notion of what schooling is supposed to look like.
Yeah.
And then when it changes abruptly like that, then you're concerned about, what does this mean?
Yeah.
And so I was just really thankful, as I said, with that understanding of whose he is, then it's not a fear decision, because we're not supposed to live in fear at all. And it was a trust issue with, great hope attached to that, not expectation, but hope and trust in knowing that God was in control. So that helped me.
Yeah, there's a quote in the book that I really liked, and it's and what she was talking about was how knowing that God is sovereign does take all the pressure off. When you said you were free, I really identified with that, because even after I've made a choice about how to school my children, we've decided to homeschool, the decisions don't stop there. Like I still have, every year even, I'm reassessing what curriculum we're using and how we're spending our time. And there's always this temptation to kind of fall into that fear. But it's so good for me to remember that it's good to make wise choices, but ultimately God is sovereign, and he knows that I can't remember off the top of my head which psalm it is, but in one of the psalms it says he knows that I am dust. And so I love thinking about it that way. Like God knows my limitations. He knows what I am capable of doing, but he has ordained this. Like he has providentially placed my children with their specific needs in my family, which has its own needs. And so not only am I free to make the choice and kind of go with it and reassess when I need to, but I am also free to enjoy my choices without feeling like I have to impose them at all on others. And I can discuss stuff like school with other people and hopefully make them feel comfortable with the choices that they made. I don't want anyone to feel like because I homeschool that they have to too. Like I totally get it. Like not everyone is cut out for it. Not every kid is cut out for it.
Exactly. That's one thing that I learned early on as well, is that each child is different. And so your education choices may need to change from child to child, depending on their need, depending on where they're at, and their best way to learn can be totally different from one of the other children.
Yeah.
So
in the same family.
Yeah. Correct.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about something else that she touched on the book, and that is home culture. So this is something that is the same regardless of whether you're doing public, private, or homeschool. And the passage that she referenced was in Deuteronomy 6. So I'm going to read that. Deuteronomy 6, starting in verse 5, it says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your strength. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. What does that mean to you, Carolyn?
Oh, well, that's really interesting that you would ask, because we are talking about training up our kids and teaching our kids. And it's like you're a 24/7 homeschooler.
Yeah.
Because, that just permeates every area of your life. The brushing their teeth before they go off to school, the sitting down at the table, the walking out the door as they go to school, and just so many opportunities there to show them God and the love of God and what it is to follow Him and what it is to live out the gospel in your life in little kid ways. There are so many ways that you can train them up in the Lord, and I'm so thankful for that perspective from Jen Wilkes, that you can, and your position is, a full-time homeschooler. This is day in and day out, moment after moment, and great opportunities. And do we fail? Oh yeah.
Yeah. And homeschooling is not like an automatic pass on this.
No.
Like, it is still something I have to be very thoughtful and intentional about.
Right.
Like,
because when you're homeschooling, you're concentrating on the reading, the writing, the science, the
academics.
Math, academics, right?
Yeah.
Can you incorporate God in all that? Yes.
Yeah, and then there's another thing she said in the book. It says, every school choice has dangers and errors that we'll have to balance and fill in with right thinking and disciple-making experiences. There are dangers and errors in the hearts of our own children. Like, even if we have the perfect curriculum, the perfect private school, the perfect homeschool, and then that's not possible, but even if we could account for that, we can't account for the sinful nature of our own kids and the dangers that come up in their own hearts. And so our work is never done, really.
I think the thing about, the dangers, the plus and minuses between, your different schooling options is there's always going to maybe be an area that's lacking. And so that gives us that opportunity as parents and in the home to fill in that area where we do see a lack.
Yeah.
And so we really need to be conscious of what's going on in the kids' school situation, if it's not at home, or even at home, and figuring out, where it is that we can actually add to their education.
So in closing, I just wanted to talk more practically about that home culture. I think it's important to note that whether you are homeschooling or choosing private school or public school, how important it is to stay alert, almost like awake in your child's life, to not rely on the method of schooling to do everything for you, but to be active and proactive. How did you do that, both in private and public school?
In our experience, just knowing that we were the number one influencers, my husband and myself, in our kids' lives, whether they were public school, private school, homeschool, there's still those opportunities. One thing that we found with public school is that debriefing at the dinner table, sitting around the table and talking about school and talking about, what's a positive thing that happened, what's a negative thing that happened at school. And then that just gave us opportunities to deal with so much that's going on in their lives, like, well, my friend's parents are getting a divorce, and looking right at you going, so if you get a divorce, whose house do I have to go live at? Do I have to choose? Just dealing with those life issues and being able to talk that through with, a gospel mindset, and just encouraging your kids to, know that God is sovereign, He is in control, and we love Him, and our marriage is His, and those kind of things. Or to hear about, even in private school, Christian school, hearing about what they're teaching.
Yeah.
So, what is it that you learned today? Well, we learned about, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in this fiery furnace. How did God stop them from burning up? So there's always those opportunities to, bring God's truth into, life for your kids.
And I've had to learn just to have intentional conversations with my kids, because they can kind of grow complacent, as can I. Just I don't want them to become numb to the truth, just hearing it often, but I want them to continually process it in a fresh way. And so we have a lot of conversations. And I also have to be intentional about bringing up those issues like you talked about, because I don't want them to be sheltered in such a way that they cannot have discussions about how the gospel applies to those situations with their friends. Well, we could talk all day probably about this, but instead we're going to turn it over to you guys so that you can talk more with each other about how does the gospel apply to your schooling choices, and where have you seen God minister to you in that season, and where do you feel Him leading you? And have those conversations with your peers and with your seasoned mentor moms, the moms who've been there. Those conversations are so important. So we're just encouraged by the word and by this book, and I look forward to hearing what God is teaching you in this.